Can't say this too often, although we might say it too often. It gets down to Florida. Whoever wins Florida wins the presidency. Florida is now in white, which is our signal, as along with Wisconsin and Oregon now, that Florida, the polls have closed. They've been closed since 7 o'clock Eastern time last night, it now being 4 a.m. in the morning Eastern time. Florida, we've moved back to the undecided category. Too much confusion down there. Races tightened down too close. Talk of recounts all over the place. Talk of, quote, discrepancies, quote, unquote, by one Dade County official. And it's just a confused and chaotic situation in terms of getting the actual vote count. But having said all that, this is the United States of America, and at some point, somebody is going to get a hard vote count, no questions asked in Florida. It may take hours, it may take days. And when we have that vote count, when it's finally in, including the absentee ballots from overseas, we've mentioned before, it may take days or weeks for them to get through. Somebody's going to put the stamp of approval, probably the Florida Secretary of State, saying, okay, this is the final vote count in Florida, and whoever's ahead at that time, then we'll color Florida blue, and it means that Bush has won it.
It's just like in a poker game, Dan, and two people have identical hands.
At that point,
who draws the ace?
I misspoke myself. Yes, who draws the ace? That's right. I misspoke myself and say when that Florida Secretary of State puts a stamp on it, we'll either color the state red or blue, and then we will know who won. Stepped on your line, it is like, okay, it's a high card draw. Whoever draws the ace being Florida, wins it, winner take all. Leslie?
I keep feeling the pain of it. I keep going into those two headquarters, the two families. You said that politics is tough, but you know, people ache when they're rejected. You've seen presidents be rejected and politicians in the past. A lot of them fall apart. It's a tough game, but it hurts just as much for them when they lose as it does for anybody who was rejected. And I'm just feeling that they're both on tenterhooks. We've pulled them from one end to the other tonight, and it's a sad thing right now.
Well, it is, but having said all that, and I quite agree with you, this is very tough for the families to go through, very tough for the candidates to go through, very tough for the people in these campaigns who pour their heart and soul into these things. But let's have some perspective. Cop on the beat, walking the beat, has a lot of pressure. Salesman trying to meet his quota has a lot of pressure. So while there's empathy, even sympathy for these two candidates, let's keep in mind that they chose to do this and that everybody has their pressures, and these are the pressures that go with playing politics at the top, just as certain unique pressures go with doing every line of work. A mother who stays home, has chosen to stay home with the kids, has pressure, she has her pain. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist for these families. I am saying once you ante up and say, I'm going to run, you run the risk that this sort of thing will happen.
They worked their way to unbelievable exhaustion up until the very end, because they were going to find out tonight, probably by midnight, maybe by 2. Now, maybe it's going to be another day. It's agony. It's agony.
Well, no question about it. As we await the outcome of the Florida vote, CBS News has now done what we think is the proper thing, the fair thing, and insofar as we can make it so, the accurate thing. We put Florida back in the undecided category, now made it white, colored it white, if you will, and along with Wisconsin with 11 electoral votes and Oregon with 7, Florida is now in the category we simply don't know who has won this race. Bush had a reasonably large lead. Boy, that's sort of a misstatement in a way, but at one point he had a large enough lead to make our computer folks and others who isn't just reading the computer printouts, make telephone calls around Florida, talk to the old-time professionals down there. The consensus was Bush has it won. But as the actual votes in and counted, reduced Bush's lead down, at one point down to about 269. By our count now, less than 2,000. Questions began arising. So we have pulled Florida back to the undecided category. And by most reasonable analysis, this probably is not going to be decided until daylight dawns, maybe not even then. It may not go on for days, but now we're working on the possibility that it could go on for days. If Anthony Mason is still with us and hasn't nodded off, Anthony, the stock market will be opening tomorrow, and if we don't have a decision in the presidential race, have you talked to anybody who's got any ideas how that's going to go?
Well, Dan, talked about earlier, the market's been looking at a while, and some of this gets factored in. I mean, that's what the market does. It looks ahead. We're still here, by the way. How can you leave? I said that before, but this is absolutely breathtaking. I don't think, you know, if the country's kind of hanging in the balance here, that's going to make the market a little nervous.
Hate to interrupt you, Anthony. We're going to go to Bill Daley in Nashville speaking for the Gore campaign.
Let me say I've been in politics a very long time, but I don't think there's ever been a night like this one. Just an hour or so ago, the TV networks called this race for Governor Bush. It now appears that their call was premature. Let me be very clear about this. According to the information supplied by the Secretary of State of Florida, with 99.9% of the vote counted, there is a margin of only about 1,200 votes out of millions cast, with over 5,000 votes left to be counted. This is a very significant, for most important reason, and that is, for under Florida state law, this triggers an automatic recount, and as everyone knows in America, this race has come down to the state of Florida. Without being certain of the results in Florida, we simply cannot be certain of the results of this national election. Let me add that Vice President Gore and Senator Lieberman are fully prepared to concede and to support Governor Bush if and when he is officially elected president. But this race is simply too close to call. And until the recount is concluded and the results in Florida become official, our campaign continues.
Live from Nashville, Bill Daley says it. Not over.
Yes. So let me
Calling for a recount in Florida.
So let me
May be mandated by Florida law.
Let me thank all of you on behalf of Vice President Al Gore and Senator Joe Lieberman for waiting out here so late tonight, and we hope to have you back very soon. Thank you very much. Good night.
Bill Daley, the head of the Gore campaign, coming out and explaining what has happened. Now, folks, in Florida, Bush currently leads by 1/30th of 1%. The automatic recount margin in Florida is 1/2 of 1%. Under Florida law, if the margin is 1/2 of 1% or lower, by law, it's our understanding they have to have a recount. And right now, Bush leads by 1/30th of 1%. That's the reason you've had this unprecedented situation. Gore calls Bush, says congratulations. Then Gore calls Bush back and says, I'm withdrawing that. Gore doesn't make a concession statement, and on we go. This isn't going to be settled for a long, long while. Gloria Borgia.
Dan, I think there were some top advisors in the Gore campaign, clearly including Bill Daley, who believed that Gore was too quick to make his concession speech. And when the margins continued to be reduced and reduced and reduced, I believe that they finally talked him out of it and had him call Bush back and take it back. And I think right now, everything is in flux over there. They're behind closed doors having meetings. They did this statement very quickly. Clearly, we don't know how long this process is going to take. It's unprecedented, obviously, but there are clearly top advisors to Gore who said, you moved too quickly on this concession. We got to take it back.
We're going to John Roberts before doing so. It's Bob Schieffer's line, but it's true. When it comes to network calls on Florida, it's now a 2 out of 3 calls race. The networks first call Florida for Gore. Then they called it for Bush. Now the third call I guess it'll be 2 out of 3. I hope it doesn't go to 3 out of 5. But who knows the way this thing's been going. John Robertson, Nashville. John?
Well, Dan, certainly this won't be the first recount in the history of elections, and even if it were to be overturned, it wouldn't be the first election to be overturned on a recount. But when you get numbers as large as they are in Florida, some 6 million votes, and it's separated by, as you said, 1/30th of 1%, it really is extraordinary. Bill Daley got up there and he said tonight that Vice President Gore and his running mate Joe Lieberman are fully prepared to concede to the Texas governor and support him if and when this election becomes official. No way to know at this point how long it's going to take for that recount and how long it will take for this election to be official. But Florida's Attorney General Bob Butterworth, who's in charge of such things, has said they will institute this recount within the 1/2 of 1%. And I would imagine that as soon as they have the votes tallied up, we're going to hear. But could that be a couple of hours? Will that be a couple of days? Because don't forget, they have to wait for those mail-in ballots that are coming in from overseas.
Well, also, John Roberts, let me correct something because I believe it needs correcting.
Good night, everyone.
That Bill Daley was speaking of, by the way, you just heard the announcement there in Nashville. They tell the crowd, the Gore people tell the crowd, good night, everybody. We'll see you in the morning. That means that the Gore people are, Vice President Gore isn't about to concede before, I guess they mean the daylight hours, since it's already morning and has been for some time. But this could be important, folks. Bill Daley, who heads the Gore campaign, said they're not conceding because he said there are 5,000 uncounted votes still out in Florida. Now, we at CBS believe there are about 55,000 votes as yet uncounted in Florida, including absentee ballots. Going to mark for you again, the Bush people believe that they do quite well with the absentee ballots. But let me restate that so there can be no misunderstanding. Daley apparently misspoke himself when he said there are 5,000 uncounted votes in Florida. We at CBS believe, we've double-checked, now we're going to triple and quadruple check, but we believe there are about 55,000 as yet uncounted votes in Florida, including absentee ballots. So this is the reason that Gore has withdrawn his concession by telephone to Texas Governor Bush. There have been 2 telephone calls, Gore to Bush, that we know of. The first one, based on network projections and calls, Bush did what he thought was a gentlemanly thing, called Governor, Gore did what he thought was a gentlemanly thing, called Bush and said, in effect, congratulations, I concede. Then he got in his vehicle, went down, intended to make an announcement to the crowd. Somebody got a hold of him at that point and said, you know, Governor, this thing in Florida is getting down so close, you ought to hold off on that concession speech, which Gore did. There was some speculation maybe he was just waiting for a teleprompter. It turned out maybe he was waiting for a teleprompter, but he was also waiting for additional word from Florida. As the Bush lead narrowed down rather dramatically, and at last count, now according to Daley, it was about 1,200, a lead for Bush in Florida. Daley and others got Vice President Gore to call back Governor Bush to say, under the circumstances, I'm going to withdraw that call to you before. Now, Bill Whitaker reported to us from Austin that there was some almost disbelief in the Bush camp that Gore would do that. However, under the circumstances, perhaps it's understandable because, according to our best calculations in Florida, Bush currently leads, and important to note, Bush still leads in Florida by 1/30th of 1%. There will be a recount in Florida. We're going to Bill Whitaker in Austin.
Dan, this campaign is reeling from what's going on this evening. They have just announced that the campaign chairman, Don Evans, will come out to address the crowd, but they've had a number of reactions to all of this. When Bill Daley came out and made his address, their first reaction was total shock. They said they didn't know what to do. They have a bunch of people out here. The crowd has been getting smaller, but people are still waiting for Bush to come out and give his speech, and now they are drifting away, and the campaign is in disarray. They don't exactly know what they're going to do next. As I said, the chairman is going to come out at some time and at some point and address this crowd, but right now this campaign is just completely baffled about what to do. Dan?
Well, Bill Whitaker, you can tell them we welcome them to the club because, frankly, we don't know whether to wind a watch or bark at the moon. We just don't know what to do here under these circumstances. Ed Bradley, you had something you wanted to contribute.
I think, you know, just trying to look at it logically, this is what has to be done. They say they've counted 99.9% of the votes. The polls closed at 7 o'clock. That was 9 hours ago. If it took them 9 hours to get to this point, and they have to go back and recount all of those votes, how many hours is it going to take? Because you have people in the precinct who count their votes.